Can a band, after a hugely successful album, disappear for almost 4 years? See time go by while audiences' tastes change, while the demographics change, and return with a record destined to become one of the most sold records of all time. And to do this in spite of traumatic events that risk to dissolve the band forever? If you want to know more, stay tuned to hear the story of the 1987 album Hysteria by Def Leppard. Hi all, I hope you're doing great. This is Luca on Music Fingerprints, and in this video I want to bring you back again to 1987. As we have seen in the video on Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction album, this year was special for music, and it was the comeback year for a great band, Def Leppard. Their 1983 release Pyromania had established them as kings of the new wave of British heavy metal. It went high on worldwide charts, had videos in high rotation on MTV, and it was on its way to be certified diamond in the US after a couple of decades. And Def Leppard's silence from 1984 was due to a number of factors, one of which was a severe accident that happened to drummer Rick Allen. He had lost his left arm in a car accident on November 31st, 1984. And when the accident happened, the new album was in the works and it wasn't clear what their future could be. The band demonstrated their unity, their solidity. They continued to work on the tracks, waiting for Rick, who worked his way to return behind the kit, operating it with one arm and his legs. He was to be known as the Thunder God, and after 3 years and a huge budget, the band released what was to become one of the most sold albums of all time. The album continued the path set by its predecessor, melting hard rock sounds, loud guitars and pop sensitivity. It resonated with many different types of audience, and for me it was one of the first albums I really fell in love with. I heard them on the radio and I purchased the cassette tape. I listened to it an infinite number of times, and it was impossible for me to find a weak song in the whole album. Come to think of it, before going more in depth on the story of Def Leppard and on the album, why don't you like this video if you enjoy this type of content and subscribe to the channel to share your support? And for those of you who don't know, Def Leppard formed in Sheffield, England, 1977. They took shape from a band previously formed by Rick Savage on bass and Pete Willis, the original guitarist, when Joe Elliott entered the picture. And not long after Joe, guitarist Steve Clark entered the band, and after the original drummer left, Rick Allen, at the time only 15 years old, auditioned and got the job. So by 1978 the first stable lineup was complete, and Def Leppard started to build a following, playing schools, parties and an ever-growing number of gigs. Their initial release On Through the Night in 1980 and High and Dry in 1981 did fairly well, and Dimebag Darrell cited the earlier version of Def Leppard that included Pete Willis as one of his influences. High and Dry saw Mutt Lange as producer, starting a fruitful collaboration that lasted for several years. And while the band was increasing their popularity, Pete Willis was increasing his alcohol intake, and his behavior led him to be fired and replaced by Phil Collen from the band Gurr. And this is the roster that concluded the Pyromania album, and that is known to be, the historic lineup for that era, with Randy Savage, Joe Elliott, Rick Allen, and the so-called Terror Twins, Steve Clark and Phil Collen on guitars. In 1983, Pyromania was a defining album for the 80s. It went on to become platinum in the US, and songs like Photograph and Rock of Ages went in high rotation on MTV, pushing the album to an outstanding 6 million copies during 1983 and brought Def Leppard to worldwide appreciation. And while the band returned to work in Dublin on the follow-up to Pyromania, Rick Allen suffered a major injury on December 21st, 1984, losing an arm in a car accident. And the following months were extremely tough on the band. Their future was in doubt, and their bandmate and friend was in a hospital trying to figure out his future life. Rick Allen later declared that at 21 he had already lived his life and achieved a number of goals, so the accident was the kind of kick in the ass he needed to prove his motivation and will, and to set himself a goal. And he did. He managed to find a way to play drums without his left arm. And in the early 80s, electronic drums were fairly rare, the technology was behind, and he had to work a lot, both on the technical side, to build a kit that worked properly, and on the playing side, translating patterns he had in his brain on his left arm to his legs. Rick Allen returned to play in August 1986, nicknamed the Thunder God by fans, and to complete the Hysteria album. And the delay for the release of Hysteria is not only due to Rick Allen's situation. At the beginning, Mutt Lange was not available to produce the album, so the band started working with Jim Steinman as producer, but they had very different visions on the album and the sound they wanted to achieve. While Jim wanted the band to sound live on the record, Def Leppard wanted an album that was completely different. As Joe Elliott said, a Star Wars for the ears. So the band wanted the sound to be big and do things in a way that was never done before. And after Rick's accident, Mutt Lange came back in the picture as producer, and he supported the band's vision. Not only his notorious perfectionism led to many do it again in the studio to have every song not only good but great, perfect. And by the way, have you ever listened to this album or enjoyed its videos? How do you like Def Leppard? Let me know in the comments below. Hysteria was Def Leppard's fourth studio album. It was released on August 3rd, 1987, after 3 years recording and being one of the most expensive albums of all time. The cost was around $5 million. The band apologized to the fans on the delay of the album in the album itself liner notes. And after all that time, there were questions about the fans even remembering them. In the UK, the album did fairly good with Animal as first single, but in the US it struggled. For that market, Women was chosen as the single, and it didn't do much. The first concerts were played to half-empty venues. Due to the cost, the album needed to sell at least 5 million copies just to break even, and it stalled at 3 million for some time, until Pour Some Sugar on Me was released. This was the very last song that made it to the album, written and recorded in a couple of weeks, and it was the last hope for the record label when released as a single. And notably, the song became a hit because strippers in Florida started requesting it on the local radio station over and over, and with an appealing video, it propelled the album sales to the top of the US Billboard 200 charts 1 year after its release on July 1988. As we said, Hysteria embodies the big sound of the 80s. It is a highly engineered record, perfectly built to captivate the audience. Pour Some Sugar on Me, Animal, Armageddon, the title track Hysteria, they are all fantastic songs, and 7 singles were released from Hysteria that dominated the album charts for almost 3 years, and to date it has sold more than 25 million copies worldwide. A massive tour supported the album, and I really think that this was the pinnacle of the band's career. Apart from the musical shift to grunge that was ahead, another big, worst tragedy was about to strike the band: the death of guitarist Steve Clark in January 1991, while the following album was in the making. And the next album, Adrenalize, did very well too, but in my opinion something had changed at that point. And when talking about music, I don't like genre labeling too much. It can be disputed if Hysteria is hard rock, pop rock or any kind of metal, from glam to heavy. I think it's irrelevant. It's an album with a solid sound, with a great production and awesome, talented musicians giving their best to create wonderful songs, with big sounds and textures. And it might sound very 80s when listened to now, but I really think it's extremely actual and you cannot but be captured by it. I invite all of you to listen back to this album if you loved it at the time as I did, or to go check it out if you haven't done it yet. And I thank you for watching this video, hoping you found it interesting and hoping to see you again on the channel for the next videos.